G'day McGraveling Ghouls, it's Mansant, and today I'm finally ready to unveil the Romping Club Levia for the Everfest format. Now, last time I shared Romping Club Levia, it was still a fledgling deck. The list was not refined at all. It was just something that I brainstormed really quickly with a friend and took to a tournament and did really well. But as the deck proved itself, I put more time into trying to figure out why the deck worked. Because if you looked at the deck list just expecting anything special, you would have just been scratching your head. It looked like nothing was coming together. But I promise you, when you put it on the table, it was working. And it was really pulling some amazing results in the later Tales of Aria meta. And I was hoping Everfest would do something to revitalize more so the Claws Levia playstyle, but instead it actually added some toys to Romping Club that really make it now a very cohesive deck, very strong in achieving what it wants to do. So I think Romping Club Levia is actually fantastic right now. I took it to SCGPhili this past weekend and didn't expect to win the event or anything, but I wanted to at least give my best shot at making top 8, and I went 4-2. Which for a deck that no one would have on their radar, like at all, not even on tier lists, to go 4-2 and beat 2 Starvos, a Prism, a Katsu, unfortunately lose to a Briar and Viserai. I mean, that was just incredible. So the deck performed really well. I think it's still not 100% refined. This is just kind of tuned to how I like to play the deck, but as more of us are exposed to it, more of us tweak it in our own way, maybe we will, as a Levia collective, figure out how to make this deck actually busted, because it does what it wants to do very well, but it has some shortcomings in some matchups that I'm still trying to figure out how to cover up there. So with that said, let's go ahead and just jump into the meat and potatoes of what you see here. And just a quick disclaimer on that as well. Like I mentioned, this is tuned to how I was really enjoying playing the deck and how I was playing my matchups. But that doesn't mean this is the end-all be-all for Romping Club. Please experiment with it. Start adding your own flavor. I just think the core strategy of the deck is what needs to stay, and that's what makes it any kind of competitive. So to kick it off right at the bat, the reason this deck is unique, the reason it's doing something that no other deck is ready for, is that it is abusing the heck out of Fyendal Spring Tunic. That's kind of the whole thing that really makes this deck unique over anything else in the metagame right now. And to really explain that before we jump into the actual core of the deck, Fyendal Spring Tunic is a card that wants to play a long game. You want to build up to that counter and use it for something useful beyond just a pitch, because a pitch is something that every hand is going to have, right? That this game is beautifully designed in that every card except Gorganian Tome can be used as pitch. But when Fyendal Spring Tunic is up, it can unlock some very interesting combinations of cards that are now playable that weren't before. Actually, I should say powerful, not interesting, because the main thing that you're going to find behind this deck's playstyle is that when you have a blue pitch, when you have a 2-cost attack, and you have a Pummel in Arsenal, or the Pummel's in hand, 2 costs in Arsenal, whatever it is, and you have that Tunic counter up, you unlock a huge amount of threat out of this deck, where all of a sudden that 3-card hand turns into a very powerful attack reaction that's going to disrupt your opponent, add a hit effect on top of if that attack already had a hit effect, like Command and Conquer. And so that's really the reason to play Tunic in this. You want to get that Tunic counter to do something unfair, because Levia doesn't do a lot of unfair things, but Tunic can kind of help you get there. Another beautiful play with Tunic is just using it to pitch a red to the bottom of your deck and use Tunic to still swing Romping Club, setting up your deck for a really strong late game. Very, very powerful. The other play to really look out for is playing a 1-cost attack like Boneyard Marauder off of a Tunic. Perhaps the Boneyard was in Arsenal. You got to block with your entire hand, deny your opponent a lot of pressure, and then still swing back for 6 attack. That is really, really strong. So we want to do more of those unfair things with this kind of deck. So that's Tunic. You're absolutely going to run it. There's no reason to run Husk, because this deck list is built around abusing what this counter can do for you. Now in the head slot, it's always going to be Arknight Skullcap. You could run Skullhorn if you're afraid of Wizard, but I wasn't afraid of it for the SCGPhili event. It doesn't mean you shouldn't run Skullhorn, but Skullcap is just extra block. It's all it's going to do for this deck, but extra block is really important especially when you're running Tunic over Husk. I mean, Husk is an incredible amount of block. You don't have it in this list though, so it does kind of have to be Skullcap. For the leg slot, you've also got just one option here in Scabskin Leathers. It's another just great blocking option for the Brute class here, and the dice roll effect actually comes in pretty big just for a couple matchups. Scabskins in this build is not something you're almost ever going to roll because you are a single attack per turn kind of deck. You are trying to trade really effectively with your opponent with cards and then preserve enough of a threat off of like a 3-card hand with that Pummel 2-cost Tunic play, or a 2-card hand that's just going tall with just a singular attack, or a 1-card hand that swings back with Romping Club. There's really no reason to be rolling Scabskins, and because of that, you're actually pretty free to run in the hand slot Skull Crushers over Gambler's Gloves. Now, Skull Crushers in this event was more of a, I guess, meta call in that I was afraid Katsu might be really strong out of the gate. I had played against a lot of Katsu in testing, and the Skull Crushers was really, really key in just denying an extra turn of Mask of Momentum. Just toss it in front of a Katachi, it buys you an entire extra turn to not worry about that. So that was really the reason to run Skull Crushers. It's just the one block. But then Gambler's Gloves you are going to run when you're versus Prism, because Prism really gets shut down if you're rolling multiple action points on your Scabskins to clear auras, and boy do they have a lot of auras these days, so you do still run this card. You also run it versus Dash because of Arg Smash, so Gambler's definitely still in there. I will say though, in running back what happened this weekend, I would have taken Goliath Gauntlet instead of Skull Crushers like in the old build, because Skull Crushers, the one block was great, but it still just wasn't useful enough over something like Goliath Gauntlet that can really flip pressure upon your opponent. So this was definitely one of the weaker cards. And then in the weapon slot here, of course, Romping Club is the name of the deck. It is the core of what this deck is trying to do when you get to provide threat, when you block down with your hand. From 4-card hand, you're not doing anything too terribly special. 3-card hand, you can start to stack Intimidates. With a 2-card hand, you can now return just like an attack, and now with a 1-card hand, you still swing Club. And because of you playing towards these blocking strategies, Club is just always better than Claw in this because it's a little bit of a breakpoint in 4, and has the small synergy when you actually play a discard effect to gain the +1. That can come up basically only with Bloodrush Bellows, but just the breakpoint in a long game is the reason to run this card. Now, I was running Mandible Claw and Arcane Lantern as a fun little combo when I was versus Prism, Chain, Briar, Viserai. The whole point in running this combination together is that in all those matchups, they're non-traditional in that you can only grind up to a point. You really have to deal with some kind of alternative strategy that every single one of those heroes has that can't just revolve around your weapon. So for example, with Prism, you're all about just grinding out their auras, and one of the main things that can really catch you late game is the arcane damage coming from Mercifuls and Shields. So having that one arcane barrier piece is actually pretty key in that matchup, especially since your weapon is going mostly towards just popping auras for the majority of the game. And then small synergy in that as well. If you do play Bloodrush Bellows, then this Claw has Go again, and versus Prism, that's pretty important because then you'll get to pressure Shields more so with the ability to go wide on that turn. So that's pretty cool interaction with Claws and Lantern in that matchup. For Chain, Viserai, Briar, the Runeblades, you just do need an Arcane Barrier piece, and then all of those matchups, you have no hope in truly fatiguing out in a fair way. You kind of just have to really go pure defense. You're not even going to be able to hold 1-card hands as swing back weapon most of the time, so you just don't need Club. You'd rather Arcane Barrier, and when you run it in the hand slot, you don't have to give up your arms, which is pretty nice. And then Mandible Claw, same thing, like you're really not swinging weapon that much in those matchups, so it's not that relevant. But if you do play Blood Rush, then sure, it's got some synergy there, being able to push back and maybe force them to block, but they basically never do. So that's the equipment for this build. Like I said, this is tuned to how I was ready to play this deck, but feel free to tweak this however you'd like. I think ideally, like I said, this changes to Goliath, and if you're worried about Wizard, then you can go ahead add a Skullhorn to the build as well. Or if you want to try to pivot to a more aggressive strategy in some matchups, you could add a second Claw as well. So that's the equipment I ran, and we'll jump into the core. All right, so on screen we've got the entire deck laid out here, and that's because I don't like to split decks between core and sideboard. I think the best way to think about that is you really have in this case, 72 card deck, the rest being equipment, and you are just going to whittle down the cards you don't need for every matchup. Not that you have a core that you minus some, add some to hit 60 every game. Just think of it like you have 72 cards you want in your deck, but you don't want all of them in every matchup. So we're going to get into the sideboarding stuff later, but that's really why I'm going to present it all as one here. So the first thing to note about this deck, and the reason it is good at all, is the Pummel and Swing Bigs and Pack Hunts and Command and Conquers as kind of your core strategy of using Tunic and those 2 cost plus a blue to set up some devastating turns that can flip games in your favor because of the card value you just suck out of your opponent. Now, this strategy isn't anything new. You know, CNC Pummel has been around forever. Bravo does this very well, but he's going to do it off of a larger hand than we are with Tunic, and that's what's special, right? So with Swing Big added in Everfest, actually, this being the central strategy of the deck really works now, because before you only really had one good target in Command and Conquer, and with like a small backup target in Pack Hunt, but Swing Big is just insane. The rate on it, 2 for 8, is so strong, and when your opponent knows you're on Pummel, they just won't block this sucker, because the benefit is in their mind never there, because you can always go over the top with Pummel. And when you do hit it with Pummel and they said no blocks, you're coming in for like 12, 11. I mean, that is more than a quarter of their life just gone from one attack. It is so strong. So really, Swing Big is what is kind of bringing this entire cohesive strategy together in one deck. Now, you may ask right off the bat, why not play Rhinar for this? And that is actually a good question. Rhinar has access to basically one better card than Levia does with this strategy, and that is Sand Sketch Plan. Sand Sketch Plan is a fantastic blue, and it would fit really well in this kind of deck, but Levia is going to get access to other cards that are good for this strategy that Rhinar just straight doesn't have any kind of equivalence to. And that would be prime example in Boneyard Marauder right here. Some of the other ones being Shadow Puppetry and Guardians of the Shadow Realm and Convulsions, but one of the big ones is Boneyard Marauder in this build. If you remember my previous Levia club build, I was centering it around the strategy of pitch all of your blood debt till later in the game, so that when you're in your second cycle of the deck, you get to just hammer them with Dread Screamers and Endless Maws, and that's how you're going to close the game, with this late game powerful aggression. Well, it's no longer what the deck is trying to do. The deck is really all centered around the Tunic abuse, and Boneyard Marauder is absolutely key for this. The amount of damage you swing in a turn cycle, where you're able to block out at minimum 12, perhaps more than that with your defense reactions, and then swing back with Boneyard Marauder off of your Tunic for 6. I mean, we're talking about sometimes like a 20 damage in your favor, well, not in your favor, but turn cycle, where you blocked 14, still swung back for 6. That is really strong. So Boneyard is absolutely key to that. It's a 1 cost. Rhinar just can't do that. He has 1 cost, but they cost a discard, whereas in Levia, we're just going to banish 3. So, yes, there is blood debt on this card. So you want to play the first one pretty liberally. The second one, you should probably aim to block with, but then the last one, in those tight late game scenarios, when you're blocking out and swing back with this on Tunic, that's when it really shines. So you're aiming to play this about twice per game, because if you're playing all 3, then that second one could hit the first one that then went to grave. And if you hit that blood debt, well, you're giving yourself like an extra ping of damage every turn, so you don't want to do that. But Boneyard, very good for this deck. Then the rest of the attacks here kind of all fall into the strategy of what Rhinar can do to close games. Well, Levia can do it as well, just with the generic brute suite of Intimidates. So you see the Smash Instincts, red and yellow, just as a relatively strong 2-card hand to be able to grind out your opponents. If they're full blocking this, then you traded 1 card for 2 of theirs, and perhaps the Intimidate made it so that they're blocking with something that they actually didn't want to. They would have deemed it, more valuable to keep, but you're putting on pressure, so they do it anyway. So Smash Instinct, strong in that. The Intimidate also is going to get layered on with the ton of Intimidates you run on the side here. There's red barraging, yellow barraging, blue barraging, and then High Roller, new from Everfest, just as an extra Intimidate stack in the blue slot. It's not going to add damage. You're not rolling dice to try to hit the 6 to double Intimidate, but it is there to add to the rest of this in late game closure, where you're just pushing this all in the bottom of your deck anyway, and then using the life lead that you hopefully have to, in the late stages of the game, just tank a turn, mediocre turn from your opponent when their resources are now slim, to slam back with a huge barraging turn and just end the game. Happens a lot. So High Roller adds into that slot. To then push it a little bit further, we're also running Awakening Bellow in blue, just because it's another Intimidate. And with all the Intimidates in the deck here, and so many of them being heavy in pitch, that's kind of your backup strategy. You don't need the late game pitch stacking of the Blood Deck cards to win. I just don't think you need it anymore, especially when coming in with like an Endless Maw for 9. There's no dominate on that. There's no keyword that actually makes it a turn that guarantees win you the game. It's just a good turn late game. But these kind of turns actually win you the game late game. So this kind of pivot to higher Intimidate as a closing mechanic was really, really strong for me. The other blues we've got here would be Wrecker Romp. It's a blue 6. You just run it. And then Blue Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell. And this is a late game card specific to Levia. And it is one that won't necessarily hit because you're not that heavy on 6s in this deck. But the opportunity for late game, when you've grinded out your opponent and their hands just are not dealing the kind of damage they should anymore, your ability to just try to play a Convulsions out because you can just seal you games. So it's in there. It's a blue. You don't really ever play it, but if the game's tight enough, a Dominate can just seal it. So it's quality enough there. The other blues are going to be Eye of Ophidia. You don't have to run Eye of Ophidia. I own the card, so I play the card. I like it in this kind of deck where the Opt-2 is going to let you set up your deck for late game even better. Peeping some of the red barragings perhaps, or even seeing, one half of your combo like a Command and Conquer but no Pummel. You can leave part of that on top, bottom the other part. I just really like Eye of Ophidia for that. But for the most part, it actually comes out of the deck. Believe it or not, we'll get to that in a second, but you really don't need it for this build. It is pure flavor. You could run any other blue in this slot, like one blue Unworldly, whatever you want to do. Then there's the blue Soul Harvest, which is also unique to Levia. It's just another blue 6. You're never going to play it otherwise. And then one Reckless Swing, and Reckless Swing is just fantastic. It's my favorite card in the game because it lets you win in that extra half-turn cycle ahead. And in this kind of deck, that is so, so strong because you're grinding them out. You're having these flip turns with the pummels that just reset the aggression from your opponent. And then it kind of locks them in this grindy state back and forth where all of a sudden they can get into points where they have to block, but they don't want to, so they're leaking damage. And then Reckless will just end games. Absolutely, absolutely love this card. At 1, it's never going to clunk up. You're never going to double draw Reckless and feel really bad. So I love it. At 1, you can pitch it early and kind of know that it's coming and plan towards that. Or if the game has, for some reason, blown out into full-on aggression and you haven't seen your Reckless yet, then you know it's coming. And you know that you won't get screwed by having like a double draw Reckless. So the 1 is just such great guarantee. Fantastic, fantastic card, but I'd only ever play it to really close the game or maybe like turn 1 because who cares? You're just going to redraw anyway. Then we've got Arg Smash. I mean, this is obviously a sideboard card here for Dash, but I do run it sometimes just for the 3 block. Then this core here, actually, we're kind of getting into a bit of the sideboarding cards. So actually, let me skip over to the other side. What we've got down here are kind of the damage push cards. The cards that, for the most part, actually block in this kind of deck, even though you'd look at them and think they're aggressively oriented. Blood Rush Bellows is a perfect example here in that it is a card that you can play for good value off of Tunic and a 6 in hand to be able to draw 2 cards, pitch one of those cards, hopefully it's at least a yellow, to swing back with Club for 7, really strong, and then reset that other card in Arsenal. And speaking of Arsenal, that is so key to playing this deck correctly because you're planning ahead on your Tunic turns, right? You're planning around your ability to abuse Tunic, and that Tunic abuse comes mostly from your pummels and your 2 costs. So these cards here are what you're always trying to get in Arsenal in some combination. You can really, really plan around those kinds of things. and it ends up just always rewarding you, even if it's not exactly the turn your tunic's at 3. Just knowing that you have it now ready for when you draw the other half of what you need is so powerful. So resetting Arsenal with Blood Rush, just kind of like drawing through, finding one of the cards you actually want there, can be pretty strong, but you normally don't actually play this. Rolling Thunder is the exact same reason. Actually, this card sucked. I really wanted to play with new cards at SCGPhili, and in internal testing, I just didn't even have this in the list. It was kind of like right before the tournament. I felt like there weren't enough new cards in the deck, so I threw it in, and it does have mild synergy with Skull Crushers. So it's there. Out of all my games, I only rolled it once, and it actually was a 6. But this card just should not be in the deck. Yes, it applies to club, but that's not how you want to be trading with this deck. You don't want to play greedy, keeping a 2-card hand just to roll Thunder into a club. I mean, if you roll a 1, that was just horrible. 1 or 2, I mean, all that's just terrible. So card's not good. I wouldn't run it in future versions of the build, but it is here. I think one of the things you could run instead here would be something like Sigil of Solace. It's great for the Prism matchups, great against Viserai, great against Wizard, although Skullhorn would be great against Wizard too. Just in that, against Prism specifically, you're not really blocking their singular pings, so Sigil is in effect like eating 3 of their shield damage, which is really strong. And against Viserai, if they're going for more OTK, you do have decent disruption here, but you also would like to make it harder for them to kill you, either in one turn or have a huge turn and then put the pressure on. And just drawing through your deck, finding sigils would be great for that. So yeah, would not run this card again. Then this is more the kind of like sideboarding package that comes in and out a lot. We'll go over the defense reactions first here, and that is double Springboard Somersault, double Guardian of the Shadow Realm. These cards are really strong. It's what helps you bump your entire defense react count to 10, which is really overwhelming. A lot of people don't expect 10 out of a deck like this, especially when they see Levia across from them. They think they're going to be playing through like maybe 1 D-React, not 10 of them. So these are just really strong for the deck. You've got triple Fate Foreseen, triple Sink Below as well, and this is just all adding to that style of wanting to trade down with your hand and return smaller and smaller hands for more and more payoff. So you always just want to run these. They're in the right matchups, I guess, because they are just super efficient blocking wise. Springboard Somersault is also one of my favorites in Brute, just because it is yellow, so it will fulfill that pitch for club, and you can just know at that point you've pitched in defense reactions for late in the game, where your opponent, if they were smart, pitched some reds as well. All of a sudden your somersaults come back with their hopeful like late game power plays, and you can just line up a late game defense reaction to counter that. So really like Springboard in the list. And then Guardian of the Shadow Realm is another one of the reasons to run Levia over Rhinar here, mainly for 2 reasons. Number 1, it is just a defense react that costs 2, and there are quite a few yellow pitch in Brute. So Guardian of the Shadow Realm is just fantastic in that it's not unmovable. It doesn't demand a blue to play, but also being a 2 cost is really key in if you're stuck with an all red hand, you can pitch one of them, use Tunic, and still be able to play this defense reaction. So I find that really strong. That honestly comes up a lot. This like all red hands that you don't want to lose a ton of value to. Well, Tunic can save you in that you're going to pitch one back into the deck and still play a Guardian. So really strong here. You're not ever really getting the recycle portion of the text off, unless I guess you banish it with Boneyard and then take an off turn, but that really has never come up. But just strong. The other half of the sideboard package is going to be the Shadow Puppetries and Enlightened Strikes. And actually, E-Strikes are in the deck like 100% of the time because they're just a 3-block and still a decent 2-card hand in that they can swing 7. So that's always going to be strong. But the go again that it unlocks when you're versus something like Prism, or when you're against Oldhim, or when you're against like an OTK Viserai, is really strong. And that's why you're going to run Shadow Puppetry as well, because in some of these matchups where you're not going to be blocking heavily, you need to be able to use your larger hands to actually do something to pressure them. And Shadow Puppetry just unlocks that beautifully. Doesn't come into a lot of matchups, but just the 0 cost, breakpoint, now go again, really good. So huge reason to run Levia over Rhinar here, because if you're pivoting more, taking this build more Rhinar route, then his go again is going to come through, like Pulpings, Wild Rides, Breakpoint, I think it's called Breakpoint Battery. And all that is churning through the deck, and that's not something we actually want to do. You'll notice there's no discard effects beyond the Blood Rush. That's because all of our cards are very precious. You know, we want to see our hands and know exactly why every card is in there, how to use it optimally, and to just draw and discard through a huge portion of your deck wouldn't fit what this deck is trying to do. So with that said, we're going to talk through some sideboarding scenarios and kind of get you into my mindset on how I do this. So like I said, I really enjoy approaching sideboarding as if every card in your deck deserves to be there. It's just against the specific hero where you realize I don't need this to really win the game. Your card might be good, but you just don't need it to win the game. So with that, we're going to jump into an example here as if you're versus a Katsu. So Katsu, pretty popular deck coming into Everfest. They gained even bigger than that. Great card for their playstyle. But how are we going to beat Katsu? Well, with this kind of deck, we have the weapon grind to our advantage. We have the flip potential in the pummels to just destroy their setup. So that's what we want to lean into, the disruption that the pummels are going to give, but we also want to use the huge defensive capabilities that this deck has to just continuously deny their ability to do anything amazing. So the first things first would be to just trim the fat, trim the 2 blocks. Shadow Puppetry, not good enough for this matchup because you are not going to be keeping your hands to really make this thing live. Next, you want to take out the Boneyard Marauders because this is a matchup where if you ever even ping yourself for 1 blood debt, I mean, that could be huge with how tight the games can get when they're using their Kodachis. And honestly, you do take their Kodachi hits quite a bit. So even though this is a great return on Tunic, that's not kind of the way you're going to win this game. You're going to win the game through a really, really long grind, not just this huge value play that you can get off in the late game off Tunic. So going to take out the Boneyards. That puts us at 6. We're looking to take out 12 cards for the matchup. Now, we're going to take out Ibophidia because it's a non-block, and you just want every card to have the capability at least of blocking. We're also going to take out the Arg Smash because it just doesn't do anything in this matchup. Sure, it's a block 3, but like almost everything's a block 3, right? So we're going to take out these. That puts us at 9 cards removed. We're looking for that last play set of cards. And this is where it can kind of get tricky because a lot of things look like you really need them to win. Normally, this is kind of the reason I was saying Rolling Thunder was so bad. You just don't need this kind of card, right? It's just completely over the top. It's not doing anything for your playstyle here. It's just a block 3, just not doing anything the deck needs. So we're going to take that out. And this is now the 60 that would remain for something like the Katsu matchup. It's giving you those core Tunic strategies here where you're going to flip on the aggression, destroy their setup, and really make it so that they have to pause in their all-out aggression and start realizing, wow, like there is damage on the table. I might have to start blocking now. I can't just keep taking clubs over and over. Look how they flipped the game with Swing Big Pummel. And that's how you get that closing power in that game. So this is what I'd tend to run. Of course, the defense reactions are going to stay in because they're just really, really fantastic in beating Katsu. Specifically here, when he sees the Fates and Sinks, you might expect that, but then the Springboards come out, the Guardians come out. Guardian covering up a Surging Strike is so good, by the way, because they can't even Ancestral over it. So really, really strong here. Yeah, I'd feel comfortable running this in the Katsu. It's what I did run into Katsu at SCGPhili, and it pulled out the win. Also, when I play this in an online armory, I 3-0'd against Katsu's for the exact same reason. The list is just doing what it wants to when you've got it set up like this. So let's talk about another matchup. So if we look at a matchup like Prism, something that's really kind of changing how the flow of the game plays out, we need to really invest a lot of resources into shutting down their strategy. They are the proactive player in this scenario. In fact, your opponents are almost always going to be the proactive ones. You're the reactive player. But against Prism, you need to do something very specific to beat what they're setting up with their auras. And that's really where this package comes in. So if we're looking at beating Prism, we want to have very live hands when we just, eat a couple shield damage from them or pass back with a 4-card hand. What do we do with that 4-card hand? We want it as live as possible to be able to clear shields, hopefully roll scabs, be able to just chuck, our Mandible Claw and Aura. That all sounds fantastic. So when we whittle down the cards for that matchup, since we're not really blocking, and if we are, it's going to be, with our 6s anyway to pop Phantasm, we're going to take out all 6 of the core defense reactions. We're going to take out all 10 of these defense reactions, and then we're going to take out the Arg Smashes, because what are they really doing? So all of a sudden, super easy. We just docked 12 cards out of the deck, and that's exactly what you need to do, right? You want to get it to a trim 60. So I think deck list is actually pretty good when you side it into Prism. Everything makes sense. The one card, like I keep mentioning, that doesn't is Rolling Thunder, right? Like if this is Sigil for this matchup, you'd feel a lot stronger. So really key in that kind of matchup, right, is your Go Again package in Shadow Puppetry and Light and Strike. It's your Intimidate stacks to make sure that you just clear shields whenever you want. It's your 6 attacks, being able to pop Phantasms, and it's your Pummels to go over the top and clear shields when they are committing a lot of their hand to defense. So let's try another matchup. So how about your versus one of the Runeblades that are all over the place in Briar? Well, what you want to do against those kinds of decks that have very key cards that they're looking to set up for Briar, Channel Mount Heroic. For Chain, it's just, an Arsenal 5-card hand into whatever he banishes to just blow you out with these huge combos. You want to interrupt those strategies. So if we're looking against Briar in particular, it's the same thing. We want to be blocking heavily, but we want our interruption to really set them back a bit. We're going for a late game grind. We're going to be blocking a ton. We're going to have to sink a lot of our blues into just blocking arcane damage. But when we swing back, when we use our pummels, it's just to take away their good cards. It's not really to push the damage. It's to just take away the quality of the cards they have left. So Command and Conquer Pummel, super key for something like that. So we're going to take out 12 cards, right? So start with the Shadow Puppetries. They just are not helpful in those kind of matchups. Take out the Boneyard Marauders, because like I said, we're not looking to deal damage really. We're looking to run them out of threat. So you don't need that Tunic flip with the Boneyard Marauders. We're going to take out the Arg Smash and the Eye of Ophidia, because you just want the blocking power that Eye of Ophidia doesn't have here. Even though it's a blue, I would still take it out. So we're at 9, and then once again, you're looking at this and you're like, what do you take out? Well, it'd be the Rolling Thunders, because they just don't do anything. So actually, I think this might be the exact same sideboard that you do versus Katsu. But points there, you want to keep your disruption and you just want to grind out the game. So let's check out another one. So how about when you're versus Starvo, which is the new crazy meta threat, right? Well, actually, this deck I think is pretty decent into Starvo. You can absolutely win games. I 2-0'd in Philly against Starvo with this, and those were some really incredible players that I got to pair up against. Unfortunately, they were not too happy to lose to a Levia of all heroes, but you definitely can win, and it's really all based around Pummel. You don't see many decks right now running Pummel at all, much less 6 of them, and that kind of disruption against Starvo is really, really strong because they don't want to block. They've got a lot of 2 blocks, and when they're trying to keep a fuse turn and you just smack them with a Pummel, they've got to get rid of something. I mean, if they don't get rid of a fuse piece, then they get rid of their attack that was going to make the fuse turn good at all. So really, really key here in using these. And really the way that matchup plays out is interesting as well, because they're going to eat your damage. You're going to eat a lot of their damage. But when you flip the game on the pummels, they just don't have anything threatening anymore. And all of a sudden, when you push the pressure that they were ignoring early game, like the smashes with barragings, or even the barragings just on club, they have to start interacting, because otherwise they just lose, because they're always under threat of just losing anyway from another huge interaction turn. So the deck just stops doing anything. And it's really interesting. That matchup is not as you'd expect. It plays out in paper like very, very differently than I think you would think of it in theory. So what are you going to take out for that matchup? Well, it is a very much an aggressively oriented matchup. You want to be pushing a lot of early game damage. You want to be finding your pummels, right? So this is just the kind of matchup where the Shadow Puppetries, they're okay in that they can help push larger hands, but you are trading a bit in this because you don't want to just eat all their damage. So Shadow Puppetry is not good enough. So we're going to take out 3 cards there. You don't want all your defense reactions for the same reason. This is the kind of matchup where you want to turn a lot of your hands into damage, and the fact that they can dominate attacks doesn't actually mean defense reactions are that good, because when you set them in Arsenal and then are able to play a card from hand and get to play the card from Arsenal into their attack as well, they're also giving it +2 and go again. So it's not like you're denying their whole threat by just having the defense reaction there. So I just don't find it does that much for the matchup. So we're going to cut stuff like the springboards. They're just not good enough. We're going to cut the fates, because if we're going to leave in any defense reactions, we might as well leave in some of the higher quality ones. And you do want to leave a bit, like this one in particular is helpful into the dominate. Like if they dominate an Oak and Old, this from Arsenal plus like 3 block from hand, plus like a 2 block equipment piece will shut it down. So the Guardian's still really strong. Sink Below, just to help cycle, is still really strong. But we're looking to take out another, we have 8 cards. We're looking to take out another 3. Well, that's when it becomes pretty easy. Those last 3 slots are always pretty easy to find in the Arg Smash and the Eye of Ophidia. Like I said, right, you really don't need this card. It doesn't come in a lot. So we can just, yeah, we can cut those and feel pretty happy. This is one of the matchups where like Rolling Thunder is doing something. You know, if their turn just isn't very threatening, and you want to turn your hand into damage, Rolling Thunder can do that. So, you know, it is decent here. So I'd take this 60 into Starvo like I did, and probably 2-0 again. Deck felt really good for that matchup, honestly. Probably one of the reasons to play this deck at all. So for our last one here, let's do something a little off the wall in Dorinthea, because it's one of the harder ones to sideboard for, but I think the thought process might help a lot of you. So when you're looking to play against Dorinthea, this is the kind of mid-range deck that the first cycle is so threatening. They want to run through their deck, and they want to punish you every time they see a Singeing Steel Blade. They want to punish you every time they see a Twinning Blade, and that's what you really need to be scared of. But then that second cycle, they tend to get so much weaker because they're playing their threats as they see them, because they need to proactively get ahead on the Dawnblade counters and have any kind of threat against you at all. So when you're playing against that kind of deck, where the first cycle definitely favors them, but the second cycle is going to favor you, you're going to do this. You're going to take out the red Pummels, because this is a card that is very good in the first cycle to interrupt what your opponent's trying to do, but it means that you're going to take an off turn of blocking, which against some matchups, that's fine, but against others like Dorinthea, like we're talking about here, that's just not okay. So we're going to take out the red Pummels, we're going to leave the yellows, because the yellows at least can still get pitched back in, and you're going to see them in that second cycle, and that's when you can really shut Dorinthea down. She's already running out of a lot of her go again, a lot of her attack reactions. Even if she's got Remembrance, she can't shuffle the attack reactions back in. So yellow Pummels stay. That's 3 cards out. We're going to take out another 3 in Shadow Puppetry for the same reason. It's only good in that first cycle. It's a red, doesn't pitch back in very well, and it means that you need a huge hand to play it to any kind of effectiveness. Not what you need in this matchup, so we're going to take that out. Then we're going to do something a little interesting here. We're going to take out 1 Boneyard Marauder and the double Arg Smash. So by taking out 1 Boneyard Marauder, that means the first one is always going to get played, right? And the second one, you're hopefully going to tuck in to your deck with like a Fate Foreseen or Sink Below, to never have that like awkward middle one that normally is blocking fodder anyway. And against Dorinthea, this second Boneyard Marauder that you get to full block out of turn and then come back with Boneyard off Tunic is really strong, because Dorinthea is always trying to conserve her resources to be able to push threat with her Dawnblade. And then when you can just pivot like that, full block out, they're going to have taken a lot of damage from your Romping Club, just trading back and forth, to then swing with that Boneyard off Tunic in that late game. It is absolutely backbreaking for what they're trying to do. So Boneyard, good, but not great. You can go pretty happily down to just the 2. So we're going to cut that. And then this is kind of that same awkward thing that comes up all the time. You need to cut another 3 cards, so it just ends up being the Rolling Thunder, because it's just blocking fodder anyway. Now, this does leave a card like Eye of Ophidia in your deck, but when you're a deck that's stronger at the second cycle anyway, I actually really like Eye of Ophidia in kind of guaranteeing that you're saving more reds. I mean, if it's in your hand, yes, it's a non-block. That is bad for the Dorinthea matchup, but 1 non-block in your hand shouldn't really affect things too much. You should still be able to play pretty defensively with the rest of your hand still blocking, you know, at least 9. And then this Eye of Ophidia can go to pitching towards Club, and like I said, helping set up that second cycle where you are definitely stronger when you can get your strong reds like the Barragings back in there, rather than just using them as blocking fodder, because when you block super liberally with all your good red cards in that first cycle, then you don't have a great late game. So you need ways around that. That's where Tunic still is big, to be able to pitch a red and Tunic to swing back Club. That's still really strong. Ivaphidia just helps you do that as well. So I'd run this 60 into Dorinthea and feel pretty good about it. I can't get into every matchup. There's a lot of them in this game, obviously. But, you know, there's some easy comparisons to draw, like if you're versus Prism, or that Sideboard versus Prism is pretty similar into Oldhim. It's the same thing that you're going to try to do, is just push through with your large hands for some kind of threat. I guess versus Dash, we can go ahead, throw that in real quick, where versus Dash, you definitely just win through the Arg Smash. Like, there's just no question that you do, because double Arg Smash is just too much for them to recover from. One normally won't do it, but the double really will. So in that kind of matchup, you definitely want to run the Ivaphidia just to find the Arg Smash faster, and you can just do something like cut the Guardians, because they aren't going to block anything tall, really. I mean, they have Command and Conquer, but you can't play defense reactions anyway. So something like that would probably be fine when you're versus Dash. But like I said, guys, this deck list is still not 100% refined. It's just how I like to play it. It's why I'm very, I guess, nebulous about how the whole sideboarding thing goes. You know, it's just what you feel. You show up with your 72. You sit across from your opponent. It's not all the time just what your opponent's hero is. It's who they are. Do you know them? Do you know how they play? And you start sideboarding towards that accordingly. So when you do this kind of approach where you count every single card in your deck as quality and just whittle away what you don't need, I think it unlocks sideboarding for a lot of people. Makes it a lot less confusing. Makes you have a huge amount of agency in playing the matchups the way you want, rather than just copying someone else's sideboarding notes. So I really implore you all to practice this kind of strategy when you're sideboarding, especially as we go into ProQuest season. You know, you want to use every advantage you can get. So if your opponent is struggling with sideboarding notes, flipping through, trying to figure out, oh, what did, you know, Kale McCreath say about Bravo sides? Now forget that. You're going to look at your opponent. You're going to have remembered all the games you played against your friend at the armory. You're going to, you know, remember all the practice games you put in on Levia against that hero, whatever it is, and sideboard according to that experience. I hope that makes sense. That's how I do it. I don't like siding in, siding out. Just put every card in your deck that you know is quality. Take out what you don't need. Just leave in what gets you the win, because I promise you this deck can get the wins. Levia is down, but not out. She still was not the biggest winner from Everfest. There is no freaking question about that. But she's not gone. She's not forgotten. It's on all of us to try to get a ProQuest win with her this season. So with that, I really hope one of us can do it. Of course, I hope I can do it, and hope you all enjoyed and take down some ProQuests.